Hi, welcome back. So today we are talking about healing the inner child. So, what essentially is it? It's kind of instinctive, right? Where you automatically, if you feel kind of like, dishonest with yourself, right? You automatically want to curl up in a little ball and kind of just get away from the world, right? And be in your own little world. So, that is pretty much what I used to do. And today I want to give you some concepts of what I did in order to help heal my inner child, essentially. Yeah, it's very powerful and it can be a transformative process. And sometimes it's like pretty much aspects and traumas, past traumas that you don't really want to that you've been taking on for a while. So if you see me here, I'm gonna be looking at my laptop with my notes. So I'm getting a little bit more creative, and I hope the lighting and the space is really good for you. But so yeah, without further ado, like, let's get into it. Alright, so as you saw the intro, we are going to go ahead and talk about the inner child, right? If you see me looking a lot over here, it's because I am pretty much touching bases on everything that I can name off the top of my head, but I wanted to be really detailed with you. So number one, we have acknowledge the pain. So a lot of the things I did was I started to recognize the wounds of my inner child and like how they carried it, like they carried a lot. And so I was honest with myself about my experiences that have created essentially causing an effect, right, for like pain, or whether it's neglect, trauma, or any other essentially emotional upheaval in a sense, right? And that is the start of it, and the beginning is always the hardest, right? Essentially, when you try to make that move, like when you are kind of facing yourself in the mirror, you're looking at yourself in the mirror and you're like, okay, what is it, what's going on with me, like what is it that I'm going through, how can I acknowledge that? So that's that. And then we have number two, which I wrote down here, which is cultivate self compassion. That really did help me out a lot because I sought out compassion in others, and when I didn't receive it, that made me a little bit more distraught. So how that came about was just me forcing myself to be by myself, and I'm in that process right now, which I love it, and I'm rekindling with friendships. I'm vibing with myself, and just a whole new chapter that I didn't think I was going to be in this type of chapter this time last year. And so that's pretty much what helped me. Is just like, it's how far do you want to go with yourself, right? Are you willing to open up those like wounds in order to let them heal properly, right? Instead of like putting a band-aid on them and letting all that ooze come out. It's essentially kind of like you have to play doctor for yourself. I'm not saying cut your like, I'm not saying like cultivate kind of like a like something traumatic on yourself. It's just metaphorically speaking all the time. So yeah, it's also practice self-compassion, right? By acknowledging that what happened to your inner child was not your fault. So I did speak about that in like the previous videos, and that does help. It's kind of like pinpointing what has been projected onto you and what you've taken on versus what really is like your trauma. And a lot of the times believe it or not, like the trauma that has been taken on is not even yours, majority of the time. And it's just like, wow, like I've had this for such a long time. And you had that like self-concept of yourself where you're just like, yeah, this is how I am, like this is how I was raised, which that's not the case anymore, right? So like treat yourself with like obviously kindness, right, and patience as you work through the healing, instead of like saying no, that's not me, or yeah, like they're not gonna like it. And it's just like, you don't want to think about what other people would say or think. Essentially, it's kind of steering down to you. It's just like, how would you parent yourself, right? How would you have that compassion for yourself? And it's kind of like creating like a cheat code, which I thought, and it really did help me, because I would record myself talking to myself, and I still do that. And I have like some private videos here on this channel, and I would record myself whenever I was down, my past self talking to my future self. And I just saw a video, it was like 30 minutes long, that I recorded, and it really like helped me, because it's kind of like giving myself that compassion that I used to seek out in others from me. And it was just inspiring, and I'm gonna cry, but it was very touching, and I highly suggest it. It's just like a time capsule that you can keep too. It's like, wow, like I really went this far, I've come this far. Okay, so we have number 3. So it's essentially connect with your inner child, right? Like we were touching bases on how to be that parent that you weren't. It's kind of like, even though you're not a parent right now, it's like, be the parent for yourself. It's like, oh, I'm doing this for my inner child. I'm doing this for my inner child, essentially, right? It's when you want to allow yourself to feel and express your emotions that may have been suppressed for several years, right? And you finally are at that point where you're an adult, and when you weren't heard as a child, now you can hear yourself through your inner child's eyes and voice. That really did help as well. So you want to give yourself permission to grieve, and that's a really big thing, right? Be angry. What keeps you aggro, right? Or experience any other emotions associated with your pain. So essentially what I was doing was thinking back, like, okay, this triggered me, or this person triggered me. What from my childhood trauma was triggered? Like, how did my inner child get triggered from this? Because whenever you are triggered by something, it stems back from your childhood, like upbringing, and a lot of it is from trauma. So we're halfway through, we're almost done. And then of course it's validate your emotions. So what that means is when, and I'm just giving you examples here, you don't have to take all of them, but these are just the precautionary measures that I took in order to balance out where I wanted to be. And at times, like, I did sync up with like where I was at. I wanted the outcome to be super successful for myself, but to be fair, I'm always learning. I am always going to be, I'm always going to be that type of person that's going to be learning, and I think we all are at the end of the day. So you want to validate your emotions. This 4. So you want to validate your emotions, and what that is essentially is allowing yourself to feel and express your emotions, because if you suppress those, it's kind of like you've just diminished the work that you have implemented, essentially, right? And so by doing that, it's 5. So it's reparent yourself. Those two really do intertwine. So what I did want to speak on is pretty much like practice those self-soothing techniques. Like I said earlier, it's where you are your own parent now. And how would you parent yourself like you wanted to be parented, now that you could see your inner child like back then, how it is? How can you do that now, right? So that's something that you can do, essentially, and it takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of patience to actually view and validate yourself from these like past traumas that are like years ago, but it can feel like it just happened yesterday, that it was just fresh in your memory, and it's crazy how that does. And also you want to have a deep, you want to develop a healthy, supportive inner dialogue, right? If you talk to yourself already, you know how the sound of your voice sounds from your perspective, right? So with that being said, when you talk to yourself inside, encourage yourself, or, you know, instead of like doubting yourself, or like, oh yeah, they won't like this or they won't like that, instead it's just like, what if I like it? What if my inner child likes it? What if this is the best thing for me to do? And being in that positive limelight of, you know, the cup being half full instead of half empty, that'll really change that self-concept that you have. And it really, really does like fulfill your inner child, or a part of your inner child, right? And heals those traumatic wounds. So that's essentially what I did, and what I still do till this day, believe it or not. So yeah, treat yourself as you would essentially a beloved child, right? Even though you're not a parent, but you know, that helps you be a parent, because when you are actually a parent, you're like, oh, I've done this with my inner child, you know, I know how to actually treat my real physical child as you were a real physical child at one point in your life. So yeah, and then we have number 6, and then it's seek therapy or support. But till this day, I still do it, especially counseling. A lot of the times, if you don't have that like support group that, you know, you're not ready to like be connected with or feel vulnerable with, that's no problem. There's a lot of like resources like around your place. You just have to research, right? And the first step is always the hardest, right? Is actually, okay, like I'm gonna seek out help, you know? And after that, it's just like a breeze. For me, it has really been helpful. That's a confirmation. And so it's like, consider seeking therapy or support from a mental health professional specializing in inner work, inner child work, and that there are specialists like that, you know, that are out there. That's really loud. That's really loud. Maybe it's like a sign for you. Okay. So they help guide you through the healing process and provide additional techniques tailored to your specific needs. It's not like how it is like at times where, you know, if you would go to a different place and you just would be compartmentalized, right? A lot of the times I had the tendency of compartmentalizing like my inner thoughts and like what was going on in my triggers and actions, and that didn't necessarily help with me and working through my trauma. So now we have number 7. So what that is practicing your inner child activities. So what I have been doing lately is I've been connecting a lot to video games, because that brings a lot of nostalgia. I've also gone to like parks and just sat down and just enjoyed duck watching, right? And seeing like the people fishing and stuff like that. You know, it has that like that inner like youth nostalgia. Like it's just calming, right? It's where you see just lively activity happening and you're there, you know, sitting down. I have taken like my nephew and stuff, and he's like that a lot. So it's just like I used to like that as a child, you know. He's 7, so when I was that age, it's like those are the typical things I'd like to do. And you know, it's fun seeing that, because it's like my inner child loves it, and it's one activity or several activities that I've done so far that have helped me, because, you know, to be honest, and of course to be fair, if you have that youthful-like or childlike mentality, it doesn't make you immature. It actually makes you mature, because a lot of the times in retrospect, we are prone to just being, you know, just like, okay, I'll be self-sufficient to a certain level, right? But this is only at a logical level, only at an ethical level. And when you don't meet your needs from an emotional and mental level, like what else do you have, you know? And a child essentially was still in development of that, right? So man, that's so good. Like that just came up, like it wasn't even in my notes. So essentially what I'm trying to say in a nutshell is like, you always want to have that type of curiosity, because once your mind is essentially just sustained on the everyday like normalities and ordained to routine, it's just, you're gonna be in that state of mind where it's just like repetitive, waking up at a certain time and, you know, doing the same things over and over, and, you know, seeing the same people at work, driving the same route, coming home at a certain time, watching the same show, eating the same thing like every week, every single day. Like that's routine. And the thing is, like, you want to step out of that routine, you know, That's another thing for another video. That's something I actually do all the time too, like stepping out of my routine. And whenever you need to take like your time, like me time, alone time, do so, because you're never, right now is the youngest you'll ever be in your life. And so if you wait until tomorrow, like tomorrow is never like a promise, right? That's why you're in the present, and it's a present, it's a gift today. So activities I've also done are like drawing, coloring, and it's really cool. I like it. I used to like to paint as a pastime, even through my teen years and like my early 20s. I liked doing that, and so that really helped me as well. So yeah, it creates a sense of wonder. Like I said, it gives you that like childlike mentality, that curiosity, you know, instead of you being kind of like in the same thing over and over again. And it creates kind of like that imbalance, like, okay, is this going to be me forever, you know? And you don't want to create that. So I wanted to close it off with just making sure to take a reminder for yourself, right, that healing is a gradual process. Okay, it won't happen overnight, and you know, and it may take time. And so be patient with yourself, and also celebrate each step that you take for yourself. Celebrate the wins. And that's something I've been learning too, like celebrate a win is a win. Like a win is a win. Like for me, when I would like conquer something or reach a goal or a milestone, I'd be like, okay, well, what can I do next? You know, that's not the case. You want to sit there in your like win and you want to acknowledge like, hey, I did this. Like I did this, you know, without seeking the validation of others, right? Whatever you do, of course, in life, it's always going to be for yourself, right? And I don't know how it is to include like children, but I'll get there when I get there, when I get that life experience, and then I'll help you out with that. But in the sense, it's take each step you take towards nurturing your inner child, and guarantee everything else will start falling into place. You know, if you didn't make it in your 20s, you can make it in your 30s. If you didn't make it in your 30s, you can make it in your 40s. If you didn't make it in your 40s, you can make it in your 50s. Like that's what life is all about. It's creating yourself. You know, you already found yourself. You came here. That's one. And you're trying to create yourself even more. It's a win. So without further ado, I hope that you enjoyed a lot of these pretty much like skill sets that I've used, and like these steps that I took. And yeah, I'll catch you on the next one.